what do you see as the primary distinction between doing what you're calling fundamental analysis on specific companies versus attempting to make broad predictions about complex systems? If you read Warren Buffett's most recent letter, he talks a lot about luck and the role that he believed it played in his own success.
I couldn't agree more. Not only is there a form of political suffering, or I suppose mental suffering of the form where the parents have to tolerate, to some extent, bear the burden of the bad ideas being inculcated in their children from politically motivated actors in the education system, everyone from other students and teachers through to the very administration themselves at the high level, the government bureaucrats writing the curriculum. They've got to get through that suffering, but also the suffering of mental torture of a kind where the poor child is forced to sit there hour after hour, as David Deutsch says, listening to answers to questions not asked. Answers to questions not asked. And so the kid has to sit there and just tolerate this boring nonsense, irrelevant lessons. There's that. And then add to that the punishments that come, the derision that is caused by these teachers that are cruel to not only your own child, but the child can see other kids being even possibly worse tortured. And then pile on top of all of that the cruelty that children can visit one upon the other, in large part because of the fact that all of them are in this terrible system where they're being bullied by adults and a system forcing them to sit in one place, enduring lessons they don't want to have about subjects they're not interested in. So, of course, they're going to rebel. And they're going to act out not only towards the teachers and authority figures, but each other. What a cruel machine of horrible torture this is. So, yeah, I agree. The overwhelming majority of parents are interested in extracting their children from this, and quite rightly. And then there are a group of teachers who, myself included to some extent, although I'm not actively involved, who are all about that, but something else on top of that. Revolutionizing the system, so to speak, insofar as that word is valid here. Completely undercutting the entire purpose of education and this institution of indoctrination. Trying to undo that at a societal level, because in terms of the importance to civilization, there's something that needs to change there. So not just about the individual, but about everyone involved. And when I say everyone, I genuinely mean everyone. Primarily, of course, it's the students. We need to save them. But, I've worked with teachers. I'm sure you've worked with teachers as well. What a waste of resources and brain power this is, to have these teachers not free to deliver lessons they want to deliver in the way they want to deliver them, relying upon a curriculum they've written themselves. There's a lot to be said against the kind of education that our parents escaped from, the cruelty that was visited upon them then. However, at least then the teachers, and I know my teachers, this is going back sort of 30 years or something, 20, 30 years, at least then my teachers, I remember, were free to a large extent to teach in the way they wanted to, about topics they themselves were expert in, and it made for a richer experience. I remember I had a teacher in Year 10. He was a science teacher. He was just interested in immunology, of all things. I wasn't. But because he was, it was fascinating. Biology was fascinating. He made it fascinating because he just went off script all the time, and he was allowed to. These days, it's a brave teacher who does go off script and violates the regulations. I was one such. I didn't care that the government was mandating I teach these certain things, or that my school was insisting I meet these, performance indicators, these prescribed lessons and so on and so forth. Everyone had to, if all the year 8 science lessons were going on at the same time, everyone had to be teaching the same thing. It was a cookie cutter approach. Otherwise, in these wealthy private schools, parents would complain that, little Sarah over there in the classroom next door was getting a slightly different lesson to little Jane in the classroom where she was. And yet, ostensibly, they were doing the same subject and being taught the same things. Why were they being taught different things? And so that completely dampens creativity from teachers. And so I want to save the teachers as well. I want to eviscerate the bureaucracy. What a waste of manpower. In some systems, there are as many bureaucrats not in the classroom as there are teachers in the classroom. What a waste of resources, taxpayer money and all that sort of stuff. There's that. And then just, pile on top of that the far greater importance that you've spoken to here about the suffering of the children themselves in this system. So it's just up and down, left and right, in all directions, a completely ridiculous system, a poverty of learning, a poverty of kindness and compassion, filled with the most evil ideas and evil methods of delivering those ideas. And students come out the other end thinking this is how learning works. And no wonder they hate things like mathematics and science. So it's delivered to them in a boring way where punishment is the order of the day. What I've often observed with the teaching profession, and this goes all the way from, your infant school teachers through to university, and it applies equally to police. It's the only other profession in which I know this happens, police. The better you get at the work on the ground, as an officer on the beat, so to speak, walking the streets, or as a teacher in the classroom, the more you're likely to be promoted out of that very thing for which you've shown great skill, talent, and competence. To some extent. But broadly speaking, the rule is if the teacher is really good, they get promoted to faculty head, to deputy principal, and finally to principal. Faculty head, they only have to teach a couple of classes, whereas the standard teacher teaches, 5 or 6. The deputy principal, maybe 1 class, and finally the principal teaches no classes at all. And ostensibly, they're the best teachers, so they've been taken out of the classroom. The same as the best police on the beat are promoted into office work rather than actually doing the thing at which they're supposedly competent. There's that factor. There's also the other factor of not only does the cream rise to the top, but, to be a little impolite, shit floats too. And so therefore, you can also have the situation where the best police or the best teachers want to stay in the classroom or on the beat respectively. And so they deliberately remain there, which means the only people available in some cases for promotion to faculty head, to sergeant or inspector, whatever the higher ranking police is, whatever the higher ranking teacher is, the only people available for those promotions, if the best are refusing to take it because they want to continue to do the job, are the worst performers. So you've got this weird mix. A strange contradiction at the heart of these two professions where you have both the very best being promoted out of the position, but also rising to the top, the very worst. And so I experienced as a teacher, you'd be given, direction by people who weren't good enough to remain in the class. They weren't competent at managing a class. They weren't sufficiently knowledgeable in science or their own subject areas. And so they were actually taken out of the classroom because people thought, you're not really good enough here, too many complaints, let's just get you out. We can't fire you because, hey, that's how education works. It's unionised. You can't just fire someone. So it was bizarre. Sometimes the people you'd be answering to would be the best teachers, and you'd think, why aren't you in the classroom doing this? You should be in the classroom more often. But of course, understandably, it's far more relaxing to be a teacher and to be a deputy principal than it is to be a teacher in the classroom. Teaching 5 classes a day in a row, one after the other, with little break or time to prepare, is hard work. It's hard work. I have great admiration for teachers who can remain in that job. I did for 20 years, 20 plus years. And refusing promotions because I wanted to stay there with the kids and I enjoyed the teaching. I didn't want to manage people. I did it for a little while and I thought, this is not why I'm in this profession. I don't want to tell other teachers what to do. I don't want to have to discipline kids from other classes because that's what happens, of course. You become faculty head or principal, and where do the naughty kids go? They get sent to the head of science. They get sent to the principal. So that's what you're doing. And you're dealing with parents. All that stuff that isn't actually teaching. Not to mention all the paperwork stuff, which is exactly what police do. I was watching a story about police here in Australia. So many of them now are encumbered by paperwork, and as a consequence, where in the past, decades ago, police could respond to 20 domestic violence incidents in a day. Now they respond to 2, and they can only respond to 2 because as soon as they respond to 1, they have to go and fill out the paperwork to ensure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, legally speaking, which means you need more police because the ones that you do have aren't actually out there solving the crimes, helping the community. And very, very much the same is true of teaching. You need more people to do the admin. So you've got to take them out of the class so they can do the paperwork. So you have all these weird positions that are created in schools, these strange titles, learning development officer, assistant head of department, technology proficiency officer, all this sort of weird stuff, so that you can get the admin done properly. And so those teachers that have that time allowance, that additional money allowance, don't have to spend the time in the classroom. They get time in lieu to do all of this stuff, and they get payments. So you've got to employ more people in the whole school. The same amount of teaching is being done, but as a proportion of the entire teaching force, it's far less. And so the whole thing costs a lot more, all because some bureaucrat decides that this is what needs to be done in every single classroom, and these are the forms that need to be filled out, etc., as I'm sure you know. Not only are there those perverse incentives where some study has been funded by Corporation X, so there is an incentive on the part of the researcher to ensure they don't say anything bad about Corporation X if they want to get employed again by Corporation X, and why wouldn't they? Scientists aren't paid that much money. The astonishing thing for me as I moved through my bachelor's and then my master's in astrophysics is I realised these people I admired, especially in astrophysics, never mind being, having these perverse incentives of being paid by certain organisations. That's not such a factor in astrophysics, but I can certainly see it playing out in the pharmaceutical realm, let's say. But in astrophysics, there's something slightly different. And I think this is true across the board. But I'll tell you my experience in astrophysics. The quality of the studies is so poor, overwhelmingly. No one's doing fundamental research, but they're getting rewarded for doing this incremental nonsense type stuff. My master's work was in galaxy simulations. For me, it was interesting. Literally, I'd use a supercomputer to program the collision of galaxies that you could see out there in outer space, and they were moving towards each other. And so what was going to happen next over the course of hundreds of millions of years? Well, you use a supercomputer to figure out what's going to happen. Are they going to merge into one big galaxy? Are they going to pass through one another, etc.? And I found this all very interesting. But at the same time, I realized this is not important, scientifically speaking.
That's a fantastic example, Brett. I suffer from sinus problems, and pseudoephedrine is the only drug that really helps me clear my sinuses. And when they switched to phenylephrine, that thing is garbage. It never worked for me. So I always have to go behind the counter and show my ID. And all of that is fine and well, not that much of an inconvenience, although it is there. But when I travel to Asia, it's a real problem, because in Asia, pseudoephedrine is, in many countries, not only not available behind the counter, it's outright banned. No doctor can prescribe it to you. It's simply not available. For example, in Japan, no amount of money, no amount of doctor visits will get you pseudoephedrine, as far as I can tell, at least as a visitor. So if I get a sinus congestion in Japan, I am well and truly screwed and literally cannot fly around until it clears on its own.